you, Taylor, for that really nice intro. And maybe good that she said a few things, because all that I'm going to tell you guys about myself is that I suck at focusing. I am a victim to daydreaming, and I can never stay focused. And we had a guest speaker this year that reminded me the importance of listening and staying focused. So I set out to be a little bit better at that. And of course, that involved sitting up straight and eyes forward, hands not busy, feet sitting still, removing all distractions. And it worked perfectly for about 5 minutes. And then I was reminding myself to sit up straight. And like every time down, Melissa looked at me, yes. And I just realized that that can't be how focus and attention works. And we are all so different. So how is it possible that just one model of focus can work for us all? So a quick Google search of how listening and focus looks, and hundreds of images like these pop up. So sit up straight, keep your head forward, eyes on the speaker. This is how I was taught to listen. I think we were all probably taught to listen like this, which makes sense why drawing, doodling, scribbling during class was a huge no-no. The act of doodling is the exact opposite of any of these pictures. And I think that the problem stems from this crazy obsession with how focus looks and how listening looks, and not really enough attention is given to how it works. So it's really no wonder that there's such negative perceptions around the word doodling, because if you take a look at the definitions, and like with most things, the way that we define it is normally how we approach it. So the word doodling first appeared in the early 17th century to mean fool or simpleton, so really not off to a good start at all. Then to scribble absent-mindedly, a drawing made without much thought, and patterns drawn while thinking about something else or when you are bored. So none of these definitions make any contribution to the idea of doodling as a learning tool. And in fact, they all equate to a massive societal norm of anti-doodling. They certainly don't align with the previous images that I showed you of what good listening is. And looking at the connotations around the word and the cultural expectations of what focus looks like, it's really no wonder to me that I was in trouble when I was caught doodling. But Sunny Brown, who is the leader of the Doodle Revolution, which I think is cool, she self-appointed herself that, and she decided that these definitions didn't work for her either, because she noticed that doodling helped her listen. And it really helped her listen when she was listening to something boring. And as a result, she defined it as making spontaneous marks to help you think. And when you really start to understand what is actually happening backstage in our brains when we doodle, you begin to see that this definition makes a lot more sense, and in my opinion, maybe even sells it a little bit short. So it's a really difficult thing to understand the impact of what you're doing on your brain. And while you guys are listening to me now, your information processing systems are at work and your brain is doing its best to retain what it's hearing. Well, that is, of course, and I hope this isn't the case, unless you've all gone into boredom mode, which it's just one of those things. Our minds drift, and even if we feel interested in a topic, staying focused is just not always easy. The strain of paying continuous attention brings about boredom for most, and that leads to daydreaming. And the problem with daydreaming is that it makes it almost impossible for you to process any of the auditory information coming your way. So I'm sure at some points in your lives, you guys have all heard someone say that they're an auditory or a visual learner. And what they would be talking about is learning modalities. And the four most widely known are reading, writing, visual, auditory, and this word almost made me change my whole topic, kinesthetic. Last night I was practicing, I was like, we got to change it. So for information to be retained, at least 2 of these modalities need to be activated, coupled with an emotion. And the nice thing about doodling is that it sparks emotions and activates 3 of those modalities. So that means that your brain is literally taking in information in 3 different ways. And my personal test, to see if I understand something, has always been to explain it to myself in 1 or 2 different ways. And I think that doodling provides a really nice opportunity to do that in a practical and visual way. So the dual processing theory states how thought can arise in 2 different ways, or as a result of 2 different processes. And for this to work, these processes often consist of one implicit, so unconscious process, and an explicit one, so your conscious one. So your conscious process would be listening, unconscious would be your doodling. This is further supported by the dual coding theory, which highlights how much better verbal information can be retained when it's encoded visually. This all supports the idea that drawing while listening not only keeps you from daydreaming, but it actually helps you retain that information so much more effectively. So a study was actually done where participants were asked to listen to a recording. One group doodled, the other group didn't. And while at the end, they were asked to relay the recording back, and the doodlers had 29% higher attention. And I think that's pretty high, especially because it wasn't even intentional doodling. So the experimenter, Jackie Andrade, she concluded that doodling keeps your mind aroused just long enough, or just enough, for it to still process incoming information and not fall into the dreaded daydream. So doodling kind of acts as a seatbelt for yourself and keeps you grounded while listening. So previously I mentioned my weakness of focusing, and I think maybe this kind of stems from that, but another weakness of mine is note-taking while listening. I've just never been able to get comfortable with it. I really, really overthink it. I get very insecure about when to write, when to stop, and I've always done my best to make these really neat, concise, written notes while I'm listening, that after a lecture I'm so exhausted and I don't actually remember anything that's been said. So it's just always been a really daunting task for me. So here's some of my best notes, like typed notes that were taken during a lecture at Stellenbosch University. And if any of you sat down and read these notes, you'd have a really good idea of what we spoke about, and you'd probably understand the content really well. And actually, when I found these, I was like, well, thank goodness I wrote them down, because I don't remember any of that content, and I don't even remember receiving this lecture at all. And then about a week or two into my own doodling journey when I started this, even though I've always been doodling, I got a little bit more intentional with it, and the way I approached my scribbles was a little bit differently. And without really realizing it, when this guest speaker came in, I had doodled my entire way through the lecture. And here are my notes, and looking back at these, compared to our first set of notes, it would be really easy for any of you to assume that I just was not paying attention in that lecture. But the thing is, actually, when I found these notes, I could remember this lecture exactly. I know where I sat. I was in the back over there. I was sitting next to Paige. I was wearing the dress I wore yesterday while emceeing. And I know the exact moments when the guest speaker, when I looked up and he made eye contact with me. And that speech had so much more meaning to me. And to you, they may look like a little bit of a mess, but for me, they're visual blueprints of what was said on that day. And the blank page acted as a playfield for my brain, and it allowed me to solidify the information that was coming in a way that I understood it. And if any of you tried to use these notes to study that talk, you would have a really hard time, because doodling is personal, and these images were drawn to make sense to me, and I've told the story of that lecture in my own visual language. For doodling to be effective, you need to be intentional about it though, and you need to approach it differently, but kind of similarly to written note-taking. So just like we don't just pop out and know how to write and read and whatever, you ultimately have a library of words and letters in your head that come to you effortlessly when you write and take notes. So similarly with doodling, you can't just expect to use it as a note-taking tool without any practice. So this means drawing when there's no pressure to remember anything. Just doodle for practice as much as you can, and by doing this, you can slowly build up your own library of doodles in your head. And the second you're overthinking how to doodle while taking notes, you've lost, because you end up missing important information because you're trying to figure out a new image. The same as when you're making written notes, when confronted by the speaker with a difficult word that you don't know how to spell, it stops you in your tracks, and you've got to take a second to figure it out, and you've lost, you're behind. And this happens with doodling as well, so it's so important to build that doodle library. And the best part about that is that the benefits of doodling don't just stop at retention. Frequent casual time doodling can really improve your quality of life. A study found that after participants had doodled, their cortisol, so their stress hormones, literally dropped. I found this to be true for myself. I started doodling in response to my own anxiety and my dreaded overthink. And I'm definitely not anxiety-free. That would be quite a breakthrough. But my brain is less fogged, and I'm able to compartmentalize my thoughts. But most importantly to me, I'm able to quiet them down. I'm able to stop them. And I feel a lot more in control than ever before. So this is a photo of a page of doodles I did about 2 weeks ago. And I was having quite a bad day, and I was feeling really overwhelmed and really stressed. And before going to sleep, I decided I better practice what I preach. So I sat down and I doodled for 30 minutes. And after 30 minutes, this is what my page looked like. And so these are a mix of drawings I've always done while doodling. And then a lot of them are the things while practicing that I've slowly added to my doodle library. And I've definitely never considered myself a creative person. Like, I am the spokeswoman for, but I can't draw. Like, I won't do it. But what this whole process taught me is that doodling isn't about that. It's about encoding something in a way that you understand and letting go of the idea of perfection. It doesn't matter in this space. So what can we all do to get the most out of doodling? Firstly, I would say get the right tools. My doodling took off when I got like a really nice pen and I found a book just for my doodles. It made it a thing. And the next thing I would say is doodle. Most of us naturally pick up a pen or a pencil when we're listening to something. It's natural instinct. Give into that. And the next thing I would say is explain yourself. Half of the reason that we try not to doodle while someone is speaking is because it's rude. You think it's going to offend that person. But maybe we need to be the ones that start that conversation and explain. And I think maybe the most important thing that we can all do is change our own expectations of how we want people to listen to us and how we want them to focus on us. And respect that people need to engage with us in ways that make sense to them. It's not about you in that moment. One shoe simply does not fit all, and I really think that it's about time that people realize that doodling is not what it looks like. Thank you so much.